My name is Carly, and welcome back to Farmer Analytics. So we're on a hunt today to find some wildlife samples or droppings that we can take a look at under the microscope. I've always wanted to do this, and I felt like today was the perfect time to do it. Not too cold, not too warm, and the snow is really going to help us find those samples. So right now we're behind our greenhouse, and we just recently did a little bit of greenhouse clean out, and the wildlife have been coming to visit. So we've got a whole mess of tracks back here, and I'm going to see if I can find some deer tracks and possibly some deer manure. Let's check it out. These look like bunny. Those are definitely deer. Look very similar to sheep or goat hooves. I already see some manure. How exciting. Let's see if we can get a little bit more, a little bit bigger of a pile. More deer tracks. There's some more pellets. Those look a little bit old and dried up. We're going to keep going. Now here's that vegetation we threw out. And it looks like I've got some great options for samples out here. And these samples should be just fine. They've been living in nature's refrigerator. It's only about 26 degrees today. There's manure everywhere. Now I'm out here looking for deer pellets, but I believe I just found a whole ton of bunny manure. We've got their little 2 footprints, and we've just got manure droppings everywhere. This looks like a different rabbit. It's much lighter in color. Should we grab these too? This wasn't part of the plan, but I think it could be fun. Let's do it. So as funny as I may look picking pieces of manure out of the snow, this is so important to know exactly what's coexisting with our livestock in ecosystems that we create with our farms and our homesteads. And I've always thought this was so important, so much so that I did an entire research paper based on this idea. However, I've never actually checked the manure on my own fields and from the deer that are actually sharing the spaces with my sheep and goats. So let's take a look. I think this could be a lot of fun. I think we could find some really cool stuff. It might be a little more difficult to see any sort of parasite infections during the middle of winter just because of hypobiosis. And if you don't know what hypobiosis is, check out my previous video all about hypobiosis and parasites in the winter. And it might be even more cool to take a look at this again in the summertime during parasite season. But I thought today would be a really great chance to find some easy manure that's super easy to see against the white snow and take a look with you all to see what we've got going on. So let's head into lab and take a look under the scope of what we got. Deer might look like peaceful neighbors to your sheep and your goats and cows, but they're sharing more than just the land. They're all munching on the same grass, which means they're pooping on the same grass too. And this was the basis of a research paper that myself and an amazing team of other scientists published in 2020. The hypothesis was that wild ruminants harbor gastrointestinal nematodes that are common to domestic livestock like sheep and goats and cows that can act as reservoirs for maintaining infections in production herds. The wild ruminant species that we looked at included white-tailed deer, elk, moose, caribou, bighorn sheep, mule deer, and pronghorn. And there were 548 manure samples that were collected from 16 different states across the United States. Okay, so here's what we found. Among the 548 wild ruminant samples received, 33%, which is one-third of them were positive for nematode DNA, among which half of those samples contained DNA from gastrointestinal nematode species commonly found in cattle. And those species that were most present were Ostertagia and Trichostrongylis, which were present in 90% and 69% of the nematode DNA positive samples, and Homunculus, Cuperia, and Oesophagostomus were present in 26, 2, and 10% of those samples. The data clearly showed that wild ruminants commonly harbor multiple parasite species whose primary hosts are domestic cattle, and suggests that further work is warranted to investigate their specific roles in the management of anthelmintic resistance. If you want to learn more about this paper and read the whole thing, I'll leave the link to the full publication in the description box below, as well as a link to our laboratory if you're looking for fecal egg count testing. Okay, so here's the deer sample. And while we didn't find any strongyle type eggs as studied in my research, we did find a low level of coccidia. Coccidia are host specific with no cross-infection between different host species. However, different host species can still harbor those eggs as an outside host. For example, these deer could be harboring sheep species and just passing those eggs into the environment. I will mention that there are a list of other parasites that deer readily share with sheep and goats and cattle, but today we're only looking for gastrointestinal parasites that we can find in the manure. And both the rabbit samples that we looked at were very similar, again, with low-level infections of coccidia. Again, they're species-specific parasites to rabbits and have no effect on our sheep or goats. So we found a whole bunch of coccidia in both the rabbit and the deer samples. And this is pretty much what I expected. I kind of hoped to see more just because I like seeing different parasites. And that's fun for me to find. But it's the middle of winter, and I think most of the strongyle parasites are in hypobiosis state. So we're not going to see much going on there. This was still fun to look at. But what I really want to do is take a look at some more deer samples in the spring or the summer and kind of keep an eye on how their parasite loads are changing as well. And this will keep us informed with what's being deposited on our pastures right now and heading into spring as well. And like I said, these parasite infections will definitely change over the course of the seasons, and I'm going to revisit this one, I think. I think it will be fun to take a look at them in a little bit warmer of weather. And the bunny parasites are not really anything to fret about or really care about when it comes to passing on to our livestock. The coccidia that they're carrying is species specific, meaning that they can shed coccidia eggs, but if another animal comes along and picks those up, it's not going to clinically affect them. They're just going to pass through their system and shed out again. This is a lot of fun to take a look at some samples around my property that are just naturally being deposited on our farm. Thanks again for joining me. I'll see you next week.